Hello, welcome back to everybody for part two. Two more presentations, and we're going to kick off with Shiri, please.
Thank you, Rob, Fumi, Daniel, for organizing. So today I want to talk to you about the role of intermediaries and policy in entrepreneurship ecosystems. So this is a very much empirical presentation. It's based on two different papers, trying to focus specifically about intermediaries and entrepreneurship ecosystems. So I know we've talked a lot about the definition of entrepreneurial ecosystems. I think the points that I take from these definition is really the attempt to explain the persistence of high growth entrepreneurship within region. And as Ben and Eric in their 2017 paper said, it's a set of interdependent actors and factors coordinated in such a way that they enable productive entrepreneurship within a particular territory. And I like the addition, I use it as an addition, even if it was before, but the fact that it highlights the importance of both the individual, right? Because we had a little bit of discussion here before just about the difference between the entrepreneurs and the rest of the ecosystem. So the context is important. Now, I work a lot on the role of universities in economic development. So that's where I pulled in a little bit of entrepreneurship ecosystem into my work. And we have plenty of studies that talk about the contribution of universities to economic development and economic growth. Specifically, there's a lot of work on research parks and their contribution to the performance of firms within universities' research parks. And then, of course, the fact that universities incubator provide access, which promotes growth and of tenant firms. And that connects a lot to the networking discussion we just had. I want to add here that in his work, Wright talked about the fact that universities themselves can become ecosystems, right? If you break them down and you see all the activities within the universities, a lot of times we can actually break them down and do the analysis and consider them as ecosystems on their own. So thinking about policies and policies for entrepreneurial ecosystems, and I'm sure many of these were not thought of as such when they were created, but some of the ones that we know are like the SBIR in the US that's based on promoting university industry relationship. We have the Innovation Act in France, which is about ownership of IP. We have the University Challenge Fund program that was created in the UK to help promote the spin-offs from universities, support spin-offs from universities. We have the Employee Invention Act in Germany, also about ownership and bringing ownership back to universities. In Canada, we have something called we had something called the Campus Link Accelerators, which were a support for different disciplines to create accelerators within universities. Now, all of these policies are really applied through different intermediaries, whether they are university TTOs, government organizations, public-private partnerships. So here I want to talk today about two case studies. One is the case of the Georgia Institute of Technology and the Advanced Technology Development Center, which is their largest accelerator, and the University of Toronto Campus Linked Accelerators. So, as I said, these are two different papers. And the first one we're going to talk about Georgia Tech. It's been published in 2018. We looked specifically at the impact of business centers on the ability of the members firms within that organization, in this case, ATDC, to grow their network. So I didn't talk to Ben before, but it's nice that it's a nice continuation of his presentation. And of course, we're just focusing on this organization within a university-based services. Now, if you look at studies on network, you see that the firm's network positively impact firm growth, which is, again, important when we talk about these connections. And, if you think about Ben's presentation about the loss of these connections, because it will impact these firms' ability to grow. And the fact that these networks are not just for, we claim that, we say that there's a lot of these non-official connection, But these connections are important because they are securing resources, different kind of resources, whether they are just basic knowledge-based resources or actual contractual resources. So in that paper, we looked at two research questions: what enables firms to establish intra-organizational professional ties, and what conditions in the incubator accelerator lead to these formations? Now, ATDC is interesting because it's really, well, comparatively old. It's existed since 1979. It's considered one of the top incubators in the US. But what I think is more interesting, especially for this workshop, is the fact that it provides services to all of the startups in Georgia, in the state of Georgia. So it's in Atlanta, Georgia, and it provides services for all the startups in Georgia, and it's actually funded partially by the state of Georgia to do exactly that. So unlike a lot of university-based accelerators that only take care of firms from the university, ATDC provides services for all firms in Georgia. Now here's a slide that shows you the different services, and what I want you to pay attention to is the two parts. One is that they have different levels of service. So you start here at the educate level, then there's accelerate level, signature, graduate level, and these are different payment levels. There's some free access in the bottom, and then you have to pay in order to receive the other services. And then the services that you receive are also different. They are services that are based more on community, again, connecting a little bit to the network, curriculum, coaching, and connection. And as you can see, some of these things are more, especially relating to connection, are available mostly at the top levels of the services offered by ATDC. So I don't want to go through all the, regression model, but I want to give you the results. So what we find is, first of all, geographical proximity is important. So firms that are in Atlanta have stronger business ties to the other firms within ATDC. Importantly is that the fact that they all benefit from the services. You see connection between the level of the service and the amount of ties these firms have. And the last part is that ATDC as an anchor tenant, and that's in a way, because Ben had so many questions, it's in a way a question for you, Ben. We found that ATDC as an anchor tenant actually helped grow the network. So as I said, the top level, the graduate members are more likely to have a larger network. And when a new tenant is admitted to ATDC, all the other members in ATDC are more likely to increase the network by one. So I wonder if maybe one of the ways to combat these issues of losing networks during crisis is maybe the connection to this, central anchor tenant, whether it's in a regional level or a national level, but some agent that will create more of these, unofficial network meetings. So in that paper, as I said, proximity matters. Programs have a positive impact on network ties. So you can see the intermediary role in creating these connection, but also the level of service. So the kind of what I call services that these firms get actually impact the level of network ties they get. The second paper is more. It looks at the CLAs in Ontario, and we look specifically at how those services actually impact both product and employee growth. So this is not about their networks. This is actually about, we're not just creating these firms. Are these firms sustainable? Do we see product and employee growth over time while they're receiving services from the accelerators? So the Campus Link Accelerator program started in 2013. There's a 20 million over 2 years, and they established 42 accelerators all around Ontario. 3 million of that was accepted by the University of Toronto. And at the time that we did the survey, the study, there were 9 accelerators. Today, there are 11 accelerators within University of Toronto. Now, some of you are flipping, you're going crazy, like 11 accelerators in one university. So U of T is a really large university. We're talking about, over 120,000 students. Majority of the accelerators, as you can see, are on the main campus, and then there are 4 accelerators at the satellite campus. Another important point to show is that they were created at around 4 years apart, and they were created at different faculty and different departments. So under the Faculty of Arts and Science, there are 2 accelerators, and but in general, they really represent different faculty. So you have the hatchery, for example, is from engineering. The Creative Destruction Lab, which is very famous internationally, is from the Rotman School of Management. The central one for the University of Toronto is UTEST. Then you have one, for example, like UTIAS, which is more, it is an aerospace related accelerator. So you can see that they're very, very different on that level in their sector, and some of them in location. So when we started this, we looked at what the literature says about accelerators and what's important in accelerators. And there's 3 things that came up. One is that, who directs these accelerators, and, the kind of knowledge that accelerator has is important. So some studies actually highlight the fact that you need an entrepreneur to lead an accelerator, and not just an entrepreneur, but if possible, somebody that has experience more than with one firm. The second is about what kind of the accelerator program you have. So, if you look at those 11 accelerators today, some of them still don't really have a program. You don't start at a certain date and finish at a certain date. They're not certain skills that you're supposed to achieve or learn more about. But some are really structured. They have acceptance dates. There's certain assignments that you need to achieve in certain times. There's certain curricula you need to cover, etc. And then the last point is we have studies that look at the selection process. So are everybody accepted? And it's very Canadian. We accept everybody. Or is there actually a screening process, which, some people say, so we're picking winners, right? And there's a lot of literature going, discussing these issues of picking winners or not picking winners, whether it's good or bad. And what we find is that the selection process has a positive and significant effect on both the employment and product growth. So firms that go into an accelerator with higher standards of acceptance are more likely to grow. And, we can have this debate of whether they actually picked winners from the beginning or not, but it's also a discussion about, we're investing funds here. And so you are investing funds in something that you should see growth in. And then there's the interesting part about the habitual entrepreneur director and the length of the accelerator program that shows significant effect on product growth, less on firm growth. And that connects directly with the knowledge expertise in the specific field, right? So it's not just that you have this entrepreneur director that has this experience with multiple firms, but also that they have knowledge in the specific industry sector that these firms are working on, which takes you back to some other examples that, a lot of us know, where we have more regional intermediaries that provide services, but they're not necessarily knowledgeable in the particular field that the firms that they engage with are. Another part that I think is important and connects to some of the things that was said this week and last week is, when you look at the services that the accelerators provide, they talk a lot about guidance from the accelerator staff, which again connects to the fact that it has a positive impact on product growth. But I also, I circled here for you to see that they do see a value in access from the accelerator, access to firms outside the accelerator that results in contractual relationships. So the accelerator itself creates these relationships for these firms with the larger network in the ecosystem. So thinking back on my, policy approach to this, if you read the policy for the CLAs in Ontario, they actually have zero measurement. They're not looking for specific, outcome. It just says teach for entrepreneurship, which, we teach policy at our school. So I have to say, this is probably one of the worst policy documents I have seen. But it does give a general push for entrepreneurship. It didn't do anything in telling these accelerators, you've done a good job or you've done a bad job. So there was no way to evaluate that. And so when you think about policies, especially when we're putting funds into entrepreneurship, into ecosystems, into these networks, you want to consider some actionable items that can be measured and say, okay, we actually have increased networks. We saw increase in product growth. We saw increase in employee growth. In the case of Georgia Tech, the government funding, it's not an official policy, written policy, but it does support the regional firms and university spinouts, which creates this, if you'd like, an ecosystem, not by, it wasn't intended to do that, but it actually created this strong network between the university spinouts, which by definition are younger, less established, with the larger community of startups in the ecosystem around the Atlanta, Georgia area. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shiri. That gives us a really good overview of what's happening there. And I say, as you said, fits in well with some of the work that Ben was saying about the changes in networks, etc. Do we have some questions or comments from the floor? Where do you think things go from there, actually, Shiri, in terms of, universities are going to be under pressure, really, in terms of finances, in terms of, again, with their own priorities. You've sort of hinted at some challenges and pinch points at different points. How do you see things going on the next few years?
So it's a big discussion here in Canada. And I think in general around the world that we tend to put all this weight on universities when it comes to knowledge transfer, university-industry relationship, and commercialization, but we don't fund it, right? As people, we don't fund it, and it's a huge issue. So I think in some countries we hope that by transferring IP rights to universities, we are allowing them to gain some funds and sponsor themselves. But the results in the field show that very few universities actually make a return from that, right? So we still can't put that as the reason to commercialize technology. What we do see is a contribution to the network, to the ecosystem. And I think actually what Ben showed us with what happens to the network one is that university can, and the Georgia Tech case really shows that, university can become this anchor for firms, and not just university related firms, right? And there's this entire literature about universities as a public provider of public good. There's the engaged university. And I think that's the value added that it's really hard to quantify. So policymakers have, issue with that. But the fact on the ground is universities do a great job because they're not seen threatening, because they're not, taking resources from others, but are a public good. And we need to know how to leverage it more because we see the benefits. And maybe that's another way for us as academics is to show the benefits of universities that are beyond that.
Thank you. Question from Kathleen.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentations. And I'm a PhD student, so forgive my novice approach here to entrepreneurial ecosystems. But I'm wondering when I hear your presentation about the importance of context and this idea of theorizing context from entrepreneurship theory. I'm looking at universities that are in Ghana and Nigeria, and a lot of the preconditions to technology transfer and the things that you're talking about with university engagement are an idea of stimulating entrepreneurial thinking. So I'm wondering if you're also considering the context of the network as separate from the community, because in my experience, I see the university network, but then I see the community as pretty much separate from that, and it takes a lot of effort to bridge the two together. And one of the ways in doing that is to think about entrepreneurship education and specifically spreading entrepreneurial thinking to scientists or practitioners beyond even academics.
Thank you. So just to make sure I got your question correctly, when you talk about community, you mean beyond the startups?
Right.
The public in general?
Yes, people living in the region.
Yeah. So again, I think you already can see that between the different countries already, and I think we have a nice representation in this workshop. You have countries. So I'm originally from Israel, and in Israel, it's like entrepreneurship. It's like every kid around age 5 already talks about entrepreneurship, and they want to invent the next thing, right? And when we moved to Canada years ago, I was surprised that it's not a discussion. So discussion on intellectual property, for example, is something new in Canada. In Canada is one of the last few countries where there's no policy whatsoever on who owns IP coming from universities. So, it is a process that you need to bring to the public debate. And so we're doing it a lot now in Canada on IP. And you can start seeing it slowly growing both on, different measurements. You look at Twitter, LinkedIn, you see it in presentations, and you see it in courses that universities offer. But put that aside, I think you are also raising an issue of, the lack of resources at certain universities to actually do that, right? And there's different ways to approach that. So in Quebec, for example, they have created central tech transfer offices, that are funded by the Quebec government instead of being funded by universities. So like a university like U of T and some of the universities represented here are very strong universities with funds, and they can probably do well with tech transfer offices, right? But others might need to pull together in order to create these resources, and also have a discussion about what can universities achieve, right? So, in my work on Cambridge, initially, one of the issues were they weren't able to even hire the right people to the tech transfer office. So if you have a tech transfer office and it's all filled with bureaucrats and people with no PhDs in the fields or no business experience, then you've done nothing. So you created an office, but it can't provide the service. So in Germany, for example, they created these regional offices by the different states that provide IP strategy and IP, information. So that's, a way to cover knowledge that doesn't exist in the university, but exists in the field, and the government can sponsor it. So there's different ways to go about it, but I agree with you. It's beyond the specialists. It does need to be a general discussion.
Question from Dina.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you, Shiri, so much for that. Actually, when I'm studying entrepreneurship, I'm still also a PhD student, but I'm at my later stages, just writing the remaining for writing the thesis. So I will reflect on you, Shiri, and at the same time, Kathleen, who's studying in Nigeria. I think in that I'm doing my entrepreneurship ecosystem in about Egypt, but in Edinburgh University, Scotland. So I think, yes, one of the things that entrepreneurs did say was the universities only offer education and support in terms of the alumni or the inactus, but they do not offer funding. So funding was one of the things that said yes, and one of them even internationalized his business in University of Surrey in UK, and he said that the university just offers co-working spaces, no funding at all. So I think this will be quite good, a reflection on the role of universities in the ecosystem, because I think the role of universities in the ecosystem can be mediated by venture capitalists and can be mediated by other actors. It almost does nothing except contribute as an element to the human capital. Other than that, they really don't do anything. And most of them are, especially the administrators, bureaucrats. They care nothing for applying rules and regulations, and they cannot be a little bit, let me say, lenient in applying things. So yes, I so much, it's a very interesting field, to be honest, about changing their own logics. Universities should change their own logics. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I think, this is really depends on, again, it's beyond what university wants. It's what we want is, each of our country wants to use universities for. So there's the knowledge base, but again, the advantage of using universities as a public, anchor tenant for the rest of the region is an advantage. But you need to give it the correct resources in order for it to perform that way. And if it doesn't, then the expectations should be similar in a similar level.
Great. Thank you very much, Shiri. Excellent presentation.